Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do an Arch Linux install, and I'm going to try to make it as easy as possible to be able to understand, and you can do it as a beginner. Arch generally, I think, would not be considered a beginner's distro, but you can definitely try as a beginner, Linux beginner. If you have experience with other Linux distros such as Ubuntu or Debian, I think Arch is a very interesting distro. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to install it. I think honestly, it's the default way to install is unnecessarily difficult, and I'm going to show you a much easier way using a software called archinstall. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing you're going to do is go to archlinux.org, and to download, you'll just find the download button like here, and you'll see something like this. You'll have options, different options to download it as a BitTorrent or something else. I'm going to show you downloading it using some mirror servers, so you can download the ISOs, and you got several different countries you can download. I'm just going to use worldwide, and I'll use this one, but all of them are going to host the same files. It doesn't matter which you use. So let's say I use the first one, worldwide, and most of these other things are unnecessary. These basically are verifying the key and verifying the checksums, but honestly you don't need them. But I'll briefly mention about them in the ISO where you find it. Okay, so you'll click on one of these links here to download the ISO, and you'll see something like this. And basically all you need is the .iso file. You don't need the .iso.sig or .torrent or any of these other ones. Now, a thing to note is that generally there's going to be two ISO files. I mean, every time I've always encountered two ISO files, and they're actually identical. This first one here, so I think the ISO files are made the first of each month, every month. And this first one here, notice it's July 1st, 2025, and it has this number of bytes, and then this one here has this number of bytes. So actually the number of bytes are identical. And if you check the SHA256 sums file, these ISOs also have identical checksum files, the SHA256 checksum. So these files are absolutely identical except for the name. So all it is the name. It doesn't matter which one you use. I think this one is going to be the more common one, the one that doesn't have the date in it. But if you prefer to have the one with the date in it, if for some reason you want to have download one each month and keep them for some reason, then you can do that. I'm going to use this file, the one that doesn't have the date. It doesn't matter. So anyway, all you're going to end up doing is downloading. All you need is the ISO file, and I'm going to assume that you've already downloaded it, and then there is an installation guide. You can find it here. Honestly, I do find this a bit difficult to read, even though it's pretty short, because there's a lot of things, for example, in the partitioning, that they leave a lot out. You have to figure it out on your own. And yeah, so the partitioning honestly is one of the more complicated things, but thankfully with the way I'm going to show you, you don't need to know this complicated stuff. The way I want to install Arch is basically as easy as possible, and later, if you so choose, you can come back to this installation guide and learn more about this stuff. But honestly, with the way I'm going to show you, you don't need to know this these commands. But the installation guide is there if you want to check it. But I'm not going to use this because I find it to be a bit difficult to understand. I'm going to show you a different way and you can get started with Arch in an easier way, in my opinion. Okay, so I'm going to install it using VirtualBox. VirtualBox is a virtual machine software from Oracle. This is Oracle VM VirtualBox. So you can use any virtual machine. I'm using a virtual machine just because if you're afraid of making mistakes with a virtual machine, it's one of the better ways to do it because you can always just easily delete it and redo it. And then once you have experience installing in a virtual machine, then you can install it on your own system. I recommend using a virtual machine first just because it might seem a little bit complicated at first, but then once you have practice, you can put it on your system. Okay, so I'm going to make a new system, and let's say I'll call it archinstall. I don't want to confuse Arch. I'll call this virtual machine Arch demo, and then you're going to find your ISO file, and I'll do that now. Okay, so the ISO image should be the one that you downloaded it. And actually, I think this one is from last month. It's probably not going to match exactly for this month, but it doesn't matter because I'll update it anyway. And then you can choose Arch Linux. And next, I recommend if you have enough memory, try to you don't actually need that much memory, but I like to use at least 8 gigs for the install. And I try to use at least 4 processors. If you have them, even 1 is good enough, but 4 will make it a lot faster. And a thing to note here is that in the installation guide, I think they assume you're using EFI. So if you want to follow the installation guide, I would check this, but you don't need to. And okay, so I'm just going to leave that unchecked. And then for now, I'm going to give it 20 gigabytes of space just because I think that's a good amount for a virtual machine, just for testing. And for your entire system, yeah, of course, if you're not using a virtual machine, you'd probably want to use the entire space of your hard drive or SSD or whatever, NVMe. I'm just going to use 20 for now. And that's that. So the initial virtual machine is set up. And now we're going to get into the install. So what you're going to do is just double click on it. It should open it. And it's going to look something like this. It'll auto log in, but you can choose enter if you want to avoid that. If you want to just do it now instead of waiting. So this is what it looks like when you install Arch Linux for the first time. And it's going to basically be you'll see a lot of output from the command line. And note that there's no GUI here. This is all command line, but that's okay. We'll be setting up GUI so we can have window manager and so on, and I'll be using mate and XFCE 4. So this probably is one of the scariest things for beginners, is like seeing this command line and you don't see any GUI. But don't worry, you can follow the steps I do, and I'll try to make this as easy as possible. And again, I'm going to be using a software called archinstall to make it much easier than their default install. And again, but if you do prefer, you can go to the Arch Linux and follow their installation guide. But I do think it's a bit complicated, or at least some things, and a lot you have to figure it out on your own. But with the system I'm going to show you, you don't need to figure it out on your own. Okay, so the first thing is to know about the package manager. The package manager is called Pacman, and you have the dash uppercase S. That means to install. And when we want to install some software, we're going to do it like dash S. And I'll show you in just a moment. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to update the system. And we're going to update the repository. So when we install, we're getting the freshest. So first we're going to do is we're going to type pacman. So Pacman, and then space dash uppercase S YY. And so basically this, it says synchronizing package databases. So now what we're going to do is we're going to type pacman dash S. So we're going to install. And now this is the thing that's going to make this much easier to install. We're going to use archinstall. So archinstall. So archinstall. And we're going to hit enter, and then you could hit enter again. You could choose to type Y, but the default would be the first one, and you can just hit enter. Okay, so now a few Linux commands. You can type Control L. That'll take the cursor to the top. And so now we've installed archinstall, and now I'm just going to type the command archinstall. So this again is what's going to make it much easier to install. So it's still command line, but that's okay. Okay, so the first thing is that the archinstall language. We've got all these different options. You can use the keyboard. So I'm using the up arrow, down arrow, and then you're going to hit enter to choose the different options. And you can choose a different language. It's set as English. I think the default is English. You can change the language. Got different languages you can choose, and then locales. This is the keyboard and the locale language and locale encoding. So you've got different keyboard layouts you can choose. Right now it's the US keyboard. So it's using that. I think that is correct. That's what I'm using right now. But if, for example, if you're using a different keyboard, like a Spanish keyboard, ES, Espanol, you can use a different one. And the locale language, again, let's say that you're in Singapore and you prefer you could use English Singapore like that. Okay, US, I'm going to use the default one, US English, but you can change whatever you want. And then locale encoding, I would keep it as UTF-8. There's no need to change it unless you have a particularly good reason. Okay, so we'll go back. So actually you can just skip the locales. I was just showing you how you can change if you want. The mirrors and repositories, you can actually skip this. It doesn't matter. But if you want, you can choose regions that are closer to you. So for example, if you live in Singapore, you can choose a Singapore server. If you live in Australia, you can choose Australia mirrors. United States, UK, etc. If you prefer to have servers closer to you, you can, for example, here, United Kingdom. But let's see here. I'm going to deselect that. So you can hit enter again to deselect. I'm not actually in the UK right now. Okay, so it's the space button actually. Because I almost never do this. I forgot. Okay, so it's a space button. The space button is actually what you choose. I was hitting enter and that was wrong. So you can select or deselect with the space button. Again, United States if you want, Uzbekistan, whatever, Vietnam, worldwide. This doesn't matter. and you can hit escape to go back and go back. Okay, because I had chosen a mirror, I'm in the United States right now. I'll actually, let's see. Okay, well, it again, it doesn't matter. It'll have a default configuration, but if you want to choose your different region, you can. Okay, disk configuration. This is the partitioning, and actually this is one of the most complicated parts, like in the installation guide. This is the reason I don't like the installation guide, because it doesn't really tell you everything you need to know about partitioning. I mean, there's a lot of things you have to figure out on your own. I'm assuming that you can do this kind of as a beginner and not need to know all those different command line tools. Okay, so let's go back. So partitioning, disk configuration. So you have to partition the disk in order to actually install Arch on it. And you have different options: manual partitioning, pre-mounted. If you know how to manually partition, you can use that. But I do think using the first option is very good. Use a best effort default partition layout, and you'll hit enter and then hit enter again. And the file system, I think you should choose ext4, but if you have a good reason, you can choose one of the others. So ext4 is usually the default in most Linux installations, especially Ubuntu or I think Debian. Okay, so what this is saying is it's going to create two partitions, and it's not capturing my mouse, but cursor. So anyway, so what it's saying is it's going to create a boot partition, which you need, and basically a default partition. That's where the vast majority of the space is going to be. So you have a boot partition and then a primary sort of default partition, and you can just accept it as is, and I'll hit enter later. The LVM, this is Linux Volume Manager. We can skip that. If you know what it is, you can use it, but honestly, it's not necessary. And disk encryption, I don't recommend that just for now, because it can take a very long time, and I'm just doing this demo. But if you have a particularly good reason why you want to have a disk encryption of your whole system, you can set that up, but I'm going to skip that. Okay, swap. I'm going to skip that because I would set this up if I had a large system, for example, more than 100 gigabytes, but I only have 20 gigabytes for this with this virtual machine, so I'm going to skip that. The bootloader, this is very important. So we're going to choose grub, that's the default. The host name, you can basically, that's the name of the computer, and you can change if you want, but you know, you can call it whatever you want. It doesn't actually matter. Let's see here. And honestly, even I forget things. I don't, I'm not sure how to, I forgot how to, let's see here. Okay, so this was something I encountered. I never encountered this before because I usually just went with the default host name. But if you want to actually change, if you want to delete a letter in the host name, actually you have to use your arrow key, and there isn't really a way to delete. And you can go back, you can hit escape. This is something that honestly I'm not sure why it is the way it is. The backspace and delete keys don't actually work. So for now, let's just use the default hostname Arch Linux, because you can change it later in the system. But if for some reason you wanted to call it Arch Linux, for example, fun, you can do that. But if you wanted to override some of it, you can use the arrow key like this, and then press the escape key to go back to the default hostname. We're just going to use Arch Linux as the default hostname. So again, the reason I encountered that is because I almost always would use the default on my own. But for making this video, there's a lot of things I haven't encountered before just because I've always just done it for myself. So for the root password, you can hit enter. I'm just going to type 1234. That is a very bad, very insecure password, but just for the purposes of this video, I'm going to use 1234 to make it easy. But I recommend using a much stronger password for root. And then for the user account, this is going to allow you to make a non-root user, which I highly recommend. And let's make a username called Archie. You can call it whatever you want. I'm just using Archie. And again, I'll use 1234. It's not a good password, very not secure, but I recommend you use a strong password. And it's going to ask you a question, should Archie be a super user or sudo? You're going to say yes, I highly recommend. If you don't want to, you can choose no, but I recommend yes because it's generally not a good idea to administer a computer as root unless you have a good reason for it. So you can have Archie be the administrator, but you have to use the sudo command anytime you want to do anything that has super user things. Okay, so what we're going to do now, if you want to make another user, you can add a user, but let's just use one username. I'm going to click on confirm and exit. And then for the profile, this is very important because it's going to allow us to set up a GUI, a desktop system. And we've got a lot of different options. You've got, for example, Cinnamon, Enlightenment, GNOME, KDE, and so on. I'm going to choose Mate, so I'm going to hit a spacebar and then XFCE4. These are two desktop environments I really like. In the past, I've used LXQT, and actually my favorite one is LXDE, which I'm using right now. And you can install LXDE in a different way in Arch. So I'm just going to hit enter. And again, you can go back to the main profile. You can use the space bar to select, deselect. You can hit the escape key and then hit escape or go back again. Profile, and then if for some reason you didn't want to use a desktop environment, for example, you just wanted to have a server, for example, you can also do that. You can set up Docker, MariaDB, Nginx, and so on. But I'm going to assume that we have a desktop environment, so we're going to use that and make sure. Okay, so it seemed that it overwrote this. I'm going to make sure that I install both these, so Mate and XFCE4. And you can choose the greeter if you want. I'm just going to use the default GDM, but if you want a different one, you can, or multiple ones. So I'm going to go back. So that was what sets up the desktop environment. Audio, I'm going to use Pulse Audio, but if you have a reason to use Pipewire, you can. Kernels, this is something that honestly, you can just keep the default, but if you have a particularly good reason, you can set up one or more of these as backups. This is the long-term support one, so it's probably more secure than this one, which gets updated. This is basically bleeding edge, but this is more stable. And you can install with the space. I recommend for now we'll just keep the default one. And later on, you can always add these on later. You can always add more kernels later. If having two or more kernels is one, it's, for example, if one of the kernels fails, the other one can be a backup, but I don't want to go through that right now. Just use the default one. The default one is fine. And if you have a reason to add another kernel, you can. Okay, network configuration. We've got these different options. I'm going to use the bottom one, use network manager, and it says necessary to configure internet graphically in GNOME and KDE Plasma. We need to have that, otherwise if we use one of the desktop environments, we won't have internet and that'll be a problem. And then this one, additional packages. I'm not going to install anything from this, but I wanted to show you what it looks like. Basically, this allows you to select packages you want to install right now with the main install, but I don't think that's a good way to install. But if you have a reason to, you can. I prefer installing with basically with Pacman. Okay, time zone. If you want to set up your time zone, you can. It's probably a good idea. I'm just going to assume the default. Again, if you're in Singapore, you can choose Singapore and so on. If you're in the US, you can choose one of these, etc., etc. if you're in Poland. But you can just use the default one, and then automatic time sync, you can choose. The default is yes, but if you want to change, you can. Okay, now what we're going to do, now one of the final things is to install. So if you have, for some reason, you want to save the configuration, you can, but I'm just going to use install. So click on install, and it says the specified configuration will be applied. Would you like to continue? And we're going to say yes. I'll say yes, but I just wanted to confirm one more time about the disk configuration. So that looks good. That's probably the most important thing. So I'm going to go back to install, and you're going to hit yes, and it says formatting/dev/sta in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, like a rocket launch. I like that. Okay, so this might take a few minutes, so it's going to download and install a lot of packages, and I'll come back when it's done. And showing you a bit more, so it downloaded a lot of software, and it does more setup. This is what it's going to look like. It might take several minutes. I'll come back again when it's done. Okay, great. So you should see something that says installation complete. What would you like to do next? And we're not going to, unless you're using your own computer and not a virtual machine. You can, if you're using your own computer, you can go to reboot system. But since I'm using a virtual machine, actually I'm just going to do exit archinstall, and I'm going to do a power off like that. And the reason we're going to power off is because I'm going to show you something here. Okay, so in order for it to work, again, I'm using VirtualBox. We need to go to settings. So you're going to right click and go to settings, and then we're going to go to storage, and you need to do remove attachment. So basically that's like, if it back in the days of CDs or DVDs, that's kind of like removing a CD or DVD. Because if we didn't do that, it would always just reload the archinstall ISO, and we don't want that. Right now we want to use what we just installed. So I'm going to double click on this. Okay, so note that we see GNU Grub, this version, and it showed Arch Linux. So it's booting into Arch Linux. So that's a great thing. And we have a default login page. I think this is with GDM. And up here we have this option to choose the different desktop environment. I'm going to keep Mate. Again, you didn't have to install Mate. You could have chosen a different one. But if you install 2 or more, like I did, you can choose which one you want. I'm going to stick with Mate, and again, my password is 1234, and my username is Archie, just for this. And what do you know? we have the desktop environment installed, so that's fantastic. And so this means basically that Arch is installed, but I do want to give you several more steps just to make it much more useful for you. Maybe not several, but a few more to make Arch very much more useful for you. So one of the first things you can notice is that, again, it's very, very minimal. We don't have Firefox installed, or we don't have Chrome installed, or lots of different softwares we don't have installed. So what we can do is open up a terminal like this, and I'm going to show you how to install, for example, Firefox. We're going to use pacman, so you're going to use the sudo command, sudo pacman, and then -s, uppercase S. It's important that it's the uppercase S, and then you can type Firefox like that. Okay, and you're going to type in the password, whatever your password is. And the first question is, there are two providers for Jack. Basically, you can choose the second one, Pipewire-Jack. The first one is basically if you have a high quality audio, like a studio quality, but I think most people would choose 2. But if you're not sure, you can look online, and I'll later discuss the ArchWiki a little bit. Okay, and then you can just hit enter for default and proceed with installation. Just hit enter. And this should be pretty fast, so I'll show you the installation. And now, if you try to go back to internet, what do you know? Firefox is installed. Okay, that's fantastic. And if we want to check out, let's check out news.yahoo.com, or let's say news.bbc.co.uk. Okay, so the internet is working, and that's fantastic. And let's go to archlinux.org, because I can discuss about this. Okay, but before I discuss about the wiki, there is one thing I want to install, which is actually a few more things. But one thing that I find very useful to have is something called bash completion. And what bash completion allows you to do is to use the tab button. It's very, very useful. Like, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So let's install bash completion, and we'll close the terminal, and we'll come back here. You can open up the terminal. So let's say, for example, you wanted to previously, if you didn't have bash completion, for example, if you wanted to type Firefox, you'd have to type the whole thing. But let's say, for example, you just type the first 5 letters and you use a tab. The tab will show basically autocomplete the best. I think it'll come up with the first one or the best one, and autocomplete the bash completion is very, very useful to have. So we've got now what I want to do is install something very useful. We're going to install something called Yay, Y-A-Y. Then this is an incredibly useful thing to have, and I'm going to show you installing something with it. Okay, so Yay basically allows us to install a lot more things than pacman allows us. And we can install things like Google Chrome and Brave and others that are not in the basically the default repositories. And some of it is non-free software like Google Chrome. And anyway, so Yay is very, very useful to have. And I'm going to show you how to install it. So you're going to do sudo pacman sudo pacman -s -needed, and you're going to install git and base -devel. So you're going to install this. First, you're going to install these. So we can install yay. And I'll show you again with the Arch. I'll mention about the ArchWiki, how in the ArchWiki how you can find this too. So we just installed those things, and now what we're going to do is we're going to cd into the default directory, which we already were in, and we're going to use the git command, git clone https, and this is the Arch user repository, archlinux.org/yay.git. And what this does is it's getting the source code for it, and then what we're going to do is we're going to cd into yay, and then we're going to type make package -si, and I'm going to type your password and proceed with installation, and it's going to download Go and some other things. But I really do think Yay is incredibly useful to have. Again, it allows you to install things like Opera and Brave and Google Drive, which I know Google Drive is not completely open source, so it's basically allows you to install a lot more things. Pacman does have a huge number of softwares you can install, but Yay is very, very useful to have, so that's why I'm showing you. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to install something. It's similar to Pacman, but we're not going to use sudo. So you should not use sudo with the yay command. Anytime you install, for example, Google Chrome, we will type our password in later, but just trust me that you shouldn't use the sudo command with yay. It'll ask you for your basically your sudo password while you're installing it, so it's a safer way to do it. So let's install Google Chrome. And just to prove to you real quick, Pacman will not have Google Chrome. I don't think it does. It doesn't have Google Chrome, so you wouldn't be able to install Google Chrome with Pacman, but you can with Yay. So we install like this, and it's going to ask you some questions. You can just go to default with all of them. And it's going to download some software. You can go with the default, yes. And so it's installing, and I'll show you the whole thing here because it's not that long. Okay, so now it should be done, and let's see if it's open. So Internet and Google Chrome is now open. So fantastic. Google Chrome is installed, and let's go to the Arch Linux website. Okay, fantastic. So the Arch Linux website works. So I just installed Google Chrome, and again, that is very, very useful. And now I wanted to briefly mention about the wiki. So the wiki on Arch Linux is very, very useful. And for example, let's say that you wanted to, I wanted to show you something here. So let's say, for example, we wanted to install LibreOffice like this, sudo pacman LibreOffice, and it asks you, which do you want to install? The default is LibreOffice-fresh, or do you want to install LibreOffice-still? If you go to the wiki and you look up LibreOffice, it'll tell you, for example, here, LibreOffice-still is the stable branch, and this one is basically the newest one for early adopters or power users. And I personally would recommend still, just because it's more stable. So for this one here, I'll install LibreOffice-still. And you could, of course, search online, but the wiki is quite good. And while that's installing, I'll also show you Yay. If you search for Yay, Y-A-Y, nothing comes up, but it is in the Arch user repository AUR helpers. If you scroll down here, Yay, it gives you some information, and these are the steps to install. And that's actually what I did. I basically used these same steps, except I used sudo pacman. So the Arch wiki, the Arch Linux wiki is very good. And again, you can search online, but if you want to use the wiki, I think the wiki is quite good. So I just installed LibreOffice. So for example, LibreOffice Writer, or this one here, we've got LibreOffice. This is basically like an open source version, open source alternative to Excel. So that's that. I think that's very, very useful. And again, the wiki is very useful if you have you want to search, or you can search online. I think the wiki is quite helpful. And yeah, so I think I've shown you the most useful things. So of course, the most important thing was actually installing it. And now that we have it installed, we actually have Arch installed. Now basically you would just choose which softwares you want to install and customize your system. I personally prefer to use the LXDE system. So for example, I would probably type sudo pacman-s LXDE. That's just me. But if you didn't want to use LXDE, of course, yeah, no need to install this. Now it's basically just my preference. And for example, here I can log out of Mate, and I'll show you using LXDE. Now see here, I just installed it, and I can choose it up here, LXDE. And now it is installed. Again, this is my preferred graphical manager, in my desktop manager, my preferred desktop manager. I like it very much, but if you don't like LXDE, you don't have to use it. And that's one of the beautiful things about Arch, is it's highly customizable, and it's designed to be minimal from the beginning, so that you install basically only what you want, and you don't need to install anything that, much of what you don't need to install much if you really don't want it. I mean, there's some things like the kernel you can't go without, but at least the Linux kernel, it wouldn't be Linux anymore. But one of the beautiful things about Arch is that it's highly customizable, basically. So this is XFCE 4, and yeah, it's amazing. And then the last thing I wanted to do is to show you, again, one of the benefits of Yay is, for example, let's say pacman-install neofetch. Note that neofetch is not available with pacman, but it is available with Yay. So you can do Yay-uppercase S neofetch. And this is often a thing shown when people show Arch Linux. They like to use neofetch. I think it's for some reason, a lot of videos just love to show neofetch, so that's okay. I'm going to show neofetch. And now, if you type neofetch, what do you know? It showed up. So we've got the OS, the host, the kernel, and so on. So, and the last thing is, yeah, you're going to want to shut down. Definitely you should test your system shutting down and restarting to make sure it works. So I'm just going to shut down and then try logging in just one time just to make sure it works. I highly recommend it. And so we're logging in here. Again, that's what the grub will look like initially. And then you load, and let's just log in one time to make sure it looks good. So again, you can choose the different desktop environments with this. And I'm going to choose Mate. I think Mate is good, especially good for people coming from Windows. And I really like Mate anyway. And LX Terminal is my favorite terminal. So one of the beautiful things about Arch is that it's highly customizable. And compared to Debian or Ubuntu probably are easier for beginners to use. And Ubuntu is probably more stable than Arch, at least the LTS, and Debian probably is more stable. But one of the benefits of Arch is that it uses bleeding edge software, and it's probably, I mean, if you're a true Linux expert, it doesn't really matter if you're using Arch or Gentoo or whatever. But Arch people just often like it to be highly customizable, and that's one of the great selling points about Arch. Okay, and again, one more time, just go to archlinux.org. archlinux.org, and you can have the download here, and the wiki is here, and this is also the Arch user repository. I didn't mention about this, but if you are so interested, you can learn about it. And Arch Linux has very good documentation online. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. This video was how to install Arch Linux and basic setup of it. I hope you enjoyed it. If you could, please subscribe to or follow my channel, and see you in the next one. Thank you.